And we're live.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Modern Romantic Podcast, where we celebrate romanticism through many creative outlets and passionate people doing some incredible things. Hi, I'm fighting evil by moonlight, winning love by daylight, never running from real fight. I'm the one called Trey. Hi. You can find me at Orphetunes on most social media platforms. And I am joined by my co-host, Emily. Hi, Emily.
Hi. I did not think to come up with a rhyme or prose or rapping or anything. So I'm just Emily today.
And we love that. We love every day you are Emily, and that's what I respect about you is that you are always Emily,
I'm keeping it simple. Thank you.
keeping it real.
Keeping it real.
Speaking of prose and some really incredibly epic poetry and prose that has been written from brain onto the page, I would like to introduce our guest today. Emily, would you mind introducing our fantastic author today?
Yes, we have a fantastic author today and poet. It's someone who is hailing from the Netherlands, the author of Endymion or the State of Entropy, Kurt R. Ward. Yay, welcome.
Thank you, guys. It's lovely to be here. I have to applaud you for what you do, not only on the podcast but the magazine, because I really think we desperately need more romantic endeavors and thinking in the world today, both from an ecological point of view and a collective unconscious point of view. But that's a side thing. So I'm a big fan, and I'm always totally up to talk about romanticism. It's my passion. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. And I think we both wholeheartedly agree that it is something the world needs more of. For sure. So I want to start by telling the story about your book.
Okay.
Once upon a time, I don't you might remember what time of year it was, but I do not. I want to say it was cold out. But in the not so distant past, there was a package that arrived at my door, and I questioned, did I order anything? And I didn't remember, but it was like this little, I don't know, little flat package. And I opened it up, and it was this like parchment wrapped, wax sealed amazingness inside. I opened it up, and the presentation was glorious. And I was like, this is like a dream come true. I have never had, like, this really is. I've always dreamed about how cool it would be to get a package with a wax sealed anything. And so I was like, oh, what is this? And so I opened it up, and it was your book, Endymion and the State of Entropy. And it is just beautiful. It has a fabric hardcover. I don't know what the exact terminology for that is in the publishing.
Yeah, linen hardcover.
Linen hardcover, okay. And it is, it has illustrations, and it is just, and I love that you signed it. That is so cool. So I feel like I have a treasure, and of course I'm going to keep it always. And so first of all, I'm just going to encourage everyone to go out and find a copy of this, because you'll want to just have this treasure. Plus, and of course you should read it too. That is probably the most important part. But to have such a cool thing is incredible. So.
Oh, thanks. But of course, the one I sent you is one of the limited edition hardbounds.
Yes, which I did notice that too.
Yeah. It was 250 copies I produced. I have a couple left, but I actually designed the whole book based on that version, which has gold embossing on the top.
It does.
And
yes.
The paper is the paper's exquisite. I even had the printer do I'm sorry to go in technical details.
Do it. Yes.
I had the printer do a special book binding process so that the edges are not flat. If you feel the paper,
rough edge,
you'll feel the edges. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then, of course, I stamped each one of them with my seal, and then numbered them and signed them. So it's a
Sorry.
it's what the book should be, which is not to say that the normal hardcover and softcover are not good. I mean, the content's the same, but that one also has 2 color printing and a bunch of other features. But I'm very proud of that one as a designer. I really put my heart in that one. So.
You did. This is like what a book should be.
Oh, bless. Yeah.
Yes. And
of course, Harry Hoybers was the graphic designer who just did an exquisite job. And maybe a side story on that is Harry, I've been working with Harry for years because I work in design, but he's a very modern designer. So he really embraces the modern. So I pushed him to his limit to try and put his head into an 18th century design. And I have to say he did outstanding. And of course, the illustrations from Rebecca Yanovskaya are to die for, if you ask me. I mean,
and did she do this design on the cover
yes.
as well?
Oh yeah. All of that is commissioned and done for the book. It's I mean, if I'm gonna produce my first book of poetry, I might as well do it right? I mean,
this is quintessentially right. Yes.
Oh, thanks.
Well done. Well done.
Cheers.
I remember the day that Emily messaged me, like, she had asked me, did you send me something? Did you send me a package? And we sat and we talked about it for a while and just kind of oogled and ogled over the book. So from my perspective, it has been a pleasure just to watch Emily geek out over the book itself. So this is utterly delightful. How the premise of the book, as far as I understand, is the character Endymion trying to wake himself up, or trying to return from the world of sleep, and it's half an epic battle and half kind of a psychoanalysis of himself. And before we dive into like how you came up with the concept for your book and how you structured it, my first question is, how did you get into writing, and how did you come to be an author?
Oh, that's a great question. I should say, how do I answer that? I guess I got to go back. I'm an avid reader. I've been reading, ever since I could read. I've always had 3 books, running at the same time. Everything from philosophy to Victor Hugo to comic books to graphic novels. The Sandman is a heavy influence on me. And but I was a very rational. I'm going to say I was a very rational child. I was very much in my head most of the time. Now fantasy also as well. So I don't want to paint a dark picture of it. But let me just say I was a very rational child. Now, when I went to college, I grew up in Cleveland, and I went to college at Baldwin Wallace College in Berea, Ohio. And to be honest with you, I never liked school. I was never good at school either, because I was more interested in the books I was reading than what was being taught. I'd rather read Plato than listen to books, but that was just my thing. But when I went to college, I discovered the college radio station, and the college radio station was in so many ways an inspiration for me. Not only for it helped me to become more social. It helped me in my business skills. I became the general manager. I did news. I did jazz show. I did the morning show. I lived my life in the college radio station. And if it wasn't for the college radio station, I don't think I would have stayed in college, to be honest with you. But the other thing about college radio was that introduced me to the alternative music culture. So, heavy on new wave techno at the time. I'm probably aging myself. I'm in my mid 50s now, so we need to go back to the 80s. But Gothic, a heavy influence in Gothic, and I started to embrace this Gothic lifestyle. And then when I moved to New York, and I was away from my parents and my context in Cleveland and so forth, and I was by myself. Then I really embraced the Gothic. I became a let's just say I became a vampire for a few years, and I started my own Gothic clothing company, a Gothic catalog. I had very high end for you, Trey. I had very high end velvet frock coats with incredible acetate. And lace, real lace. I mean, it was not. How do you say? It was not cheap Gothic. It was expensive Gothic.
Yeah.
In fact, Mick Jagger, Howard Stern, Al Jorgensen from the Ministry, they all wore this designer that I was using on covers of magazines. It was very high end. That Gothic catalog didn't succeed very well because most of the Goths didn't have the money to pay for a $500 frock. But I had a fantastic wardrobe.
I bet. That sounds awesome.
But what I'm trying to say is that. So I started to embrace this Gothic side of me as opposed to this rational side of me. And of course the Romantics had always been in the back of my head because I've always been obsessed by Percy Shelley and the 18th century. I mean, there's a poem called The Highwayman by Alfred Noyes, which is an Edgar Allan Poe. I was just going to start to recite The Highwayman for you. Sorry.
You're welcome to.
Well, the wind was a torrent of darkness among the gusty trees. The moon was a ghostly galleon tossed upon cloudy seas. The road was a ribbon of moonlight over the purple moor, and the highwayman came riding. The highwayman came riding up to the old oak inn door. He had a French cocked hat on his forehead, a bunch of lace at his chin, a coat of claret velvet, and breeches of brown doe skin. They fitted with never a wrinkle. His boots were up to the thigh, and he rode with a jeweled twinkle. His pistol butts a twinkle, his rapier hilt a twinkle under the jeweled sky. And so, it was that side of the 18th century side that just lured me in, and thank God for my friends that I found in New York, my very dear best friends, because they kind of saw beyond the vampiric Gothic facade, which was really I'm going to call it a facade for a moment. We don't have to go on all that detail, but they saw through that, and they reinforced this Gothic romantic poet side of me. Now, and this is a long story. I'm sorry, but
that's okay. No,
oh, that's fine.
We've got time.
So, and of course, my goal wasn't to write a book of poetry and to be published as a poet. I wanted to live poetically. Now, writing poetry is one aspect of that, but it's how you live your life, your sense of life, and how you go about life. So I was in this huge transition. And I fully embraced, basically I felt like I should have been born in, 1800, together with Novalis and Schiller and Shelley and Keats and Blake and all them. And I started to live that way. Now, on the other side, I was in this corporate environment. I was working at CBS Radio, and I was a research director and research analyst there for many years. So during the day, I did this corporate thing. And then at night and the weekends, like I had mentioned, I spent a lot of time at Renaissance fairs. I had a booth at Renaissance fairs selling chainmail and the Gothic clothing. I did the Maryland Fair. I did the Boston Fair. I did the New York Fair. Even did one in Galveston, Texas. But
oh yeah.
So to get back to your point, I because I was embracing this idea of, I wanted to become a romantic poet and live poetically. Of course, I started writing, and the story of this Endymion is a little bit deeper. So I'll stop and I'll let you sink that in, what I just said, if it made any sense. I don't know.
No, it definitely makes sense. What I've noticed, and I think I've said this before, but what I've noticed specifically from our guests is that the journey to being a romantic is not always a straight path.
No.
It's many detours, many different paths, sometimes along the corporate route of things. Some people are still in the corporate scene and have the balance to be able to explore the romantic side, and et cetera. So long story short, the path to romantic is never straight. So if you are considering being a romantic, do it. Do it.
It's okay to have many facets.
Yes. Oh, and that's at the heart of romanticism as well, right? It's not the great thing about it is it's not a dictated, thing. It's a sense of life. It's a sense that, that we are a part of something greater, greater than our own egos, I should say. And that sense, that being, whether it's within nature or with our subconscious or with art or with society or with the revolutionary movement of trying to improve the world is a way to live. It's actually a sense of life rather than, I know there's an art movement and we're talking about the art movement, but the art movement is a indicative of, that sense of life. And you don't necessarily have to be an artist to embrace that sense of life either.
That's true.
I think.
You can appreciate it without being like a painter.
Yeah. I mean, because it's like I said, it's the perspective of ourselves towards, the universe, which is I'm going a little bit existential here, but I mean,
Right.
in a way, it's trying to remove the rational ego from our daily experience, because then it allows in a deeper interaction with life in the universe, whether it's a flower in a garden or whether it's art or whether it's music or whether it's in love or whether it's in, a universal cosmological existential experience. If you will. I just tried.
Trey is.
That's a bit heavy, right? I'm sorry.
No, that's
No.
we are constantly trying to educate people what romanticism is, because so many people equate it with romantic love, and because the root word is similar, so we find that it's a pretty constant education. Even our opening credits kind of, or our like the stream starting soon screen before we go live on our live streams educates people about romanticism, so they don't go into this thinking we're going to talk about dating.
Right.
No.
Yeah.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I do like myself some fun romance novels, but not what we're talking about.
It's way more than that. That can be a slice of it, but
Yeah.
I think that's something that a lot of people sadly miss out on because of it too.
Yeah, it has a bit of a bias. I could say that, but then I don't know if you want me to move into the next part, which was then how Endymion came about, because I'd written a number of odes and ballads, shorter pieces, and there's this letter from Keats, John Keats, to his brother, where he talks about if you're really going to be a true poet, you have to do something epic, something large. So I took that on, and so I decided to write a larger epic, and in this case I chose to do a lyrical drama, which sounds complicated, but in essence it's an unacted play. So in other words, there's no scene direction in it, so it's dialogue between characters, and in my case I did it in poetic meter. So Ezekiel's Prometheus Bound is an example of that. Goethe's Faust is an example. Of course, Shelley's Prometheus Unbound is another great example. And of course, and what I was thinking about doing at the time, the reason for it was I was going to try to do something around platonic love, free love, which was going to be my answer to Percy Shelley's Epipsychodion, which is his tract on love. And I've always been obsessed with the moon, and of course the mythology between Endymion being in love with the moon, or the moon being in love with Endymion in sleep, was just a perfect match. So I said, okay, I'm going to use that. But because I had never attempted something large scale, almost as a novel in a sense, it needs to have sequential things, and it's not just not just an expression of let's say an experience in a poetic form. It actually has to have some structure. I made a very critical decision, and that was, I wasn't going to start linearly. I was going to say, okay, line 1, act 1, here's what happens. Mm-hmm. I said to myself, I'm going to put this at the back of my head. I'm going to park it, and over the next couple of months, I'm going to, basically collect ideas or lines and write them down. And then when I get enough of it, then I'll go in and try to work it and get some structure out of it, because then I'd have some substance to work with. Now, little did I know that was an incredibly important decision that really changed my life, to be honest with you, because what happened was I don't know about you, but I always have 2 or 3 things going on in the back of my head. I'm
Yes.
I'm not very sensitive.
Mhm.
I mean, I've got Beethoven's Seventh going on. I'm talking to you, and I'm thinking about the book, and I've got my next book coming, and it's just how I work on many
Yeah.
levels. Now, when I'm walking down the street, or when I'm in a park, or when I'm in nature, or even just doing chores, and usually playing piano or gardening, I can zone out, let's say. And when I say zone out, I mean not consciously say, okay, I need to think about this. Just let things happen randomly. So what happened was I would always carry a notebook with me and paper, and I started capturing these lines and ideas over 3 months. And then the craziest thing happened, which was I was in southern Massachusetts, outside of a restaurant at around 10 o'clock at night, and the moon and the scene and the ambiance and everything, it was electric. It was magic. I felt like I was walking into a fairy tale at that moment when I was outside, and not with the intention that it would be, but just it was like, wow, I was just overwhelmed by it. And there was this tree across the street, a 100, 200-year-old huge oak tree, which felt surreal to me. It felt, I don't know how to express it, but it stood out and was almost like I was watching a movie in life. It was magic. And then I started to hear this line, and the line that I heard, I felt like I was being spoken to. I was not saying the line, if that makes any sense to you.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And it felt like the tree was speaking to me. And it turned out that line, "Eternity rests for none," was something that I had, written down like 2 months ago before this. And, I should preface this by saying that when I was writing down all these lines, they all sounded like gibberish to me. It all sounded crazy. I didn't understand most of what I was writing down. I mean, I did not critique it. I did not analyze it. I did not perfect it when I wrote it down. I just let it there.
Mm-hmm.
And that was another critical decision. So when I had this experience with this, in this case, the tree, I had this sudden realization that, wait a minute, this was a line that came to me, that was spoken to me 2 months ago. And I started to feel like, wait a minute, this is a prophetic thing. In other words, the lines that were coming were indicative of a esoteric experience I was going to get, or a transition. Does that make any sense to you? Am I making?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
we're following.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
So that was I was surprised, shocked, and a little scared by that. After a few months of embracing that, then it got pretty crazy, because then I was literally talking to the moon, and Diana's face was in the moon talking to me. Hermes appears in the clouds and is talking to me. I hear voices from behind talking to me. And now, mind you, I didn't express this to anybody, because I really felt like I was kind of going mad, or I was being schizophrenic. I mean, how do you tell somebody you're having a conversation with the moon? Especially in the 20th century in America, in this case. So what I'm trying to say is that the book came about because, in essence, I was letting these archetypes, these universal archetypes, through my subconscious, come through me, not being suppressed by my ego. And now there are many lines in the book which I could take credit for, of course, because I spoke them. I mean, Endymion's line. But the reality is I can't really take much credit for many of those lines. I mean, it was my subconscious speaking, but I didn't consciously write them, if that, does that make any sense? So I feel like
It does. I mean,
I can't take a responsibility for something that I didn't consciously create in that sense.
I mean, I think that there are, like, as an author, you are always going to be the conduit for your character's lines. And a lot of times there are, and I think one of our guests, either the week before or the week before last, was talking about that it's very difficult to separate or get your head out of these characters. It was Tom Blomquist was talking about how it's very difficult to separate yourself from your characters, and they're always going to be sitting at whatever your medium is, whether it be your typewriter, your pen and paper, in the back of your head. They're always going to be sitting there. So you as an author are definitely going to be the conduit through which all of your characters speak, what they say, and they're influenced by many, many different things. So absolutely, that definitely makes sense.
So I in a way, I can't actually say that the book is fiction. And I say that because having gone through, and there's a pinnacle point which I probably need to tell you about, which where it all comes together in Act 3, and where I really experienced it in Rome in the cemetery with Keats. But in retrospect now, and it's still taking me 30 years to figure out what happened, to be honest with you, and what that was all about. I mean, at the time I had no idea what was going on. But now in retrospect, after reading Carl Jung and a number of other esoteric writers and other things, and William Blake and things, that it appears to me that what was actually happening was that I was, these archetypes that are existing within us are universal. They're in our collective unconscious. So I don't think, to be honest with you, I don't believe in this case, it being a fictional character of Diana. I actually believe that the energy of Diana, the energy of Zephyrus and Zeus, and I used Greco-Roman mythology in this case, but it could be any mythology that you're using, whether it's, Christian mythology, or whether it's, Nordic or any others. But I think that the thing that I hit upon by doing this in a subconscious active imagination way, if you will, was connecting to these universal archetype energies, which I think are in all of us. And maybe I should preface this with, because now I can say this, and I sat on the book for 30 years. Oh. Actually, I sat on the content for 30 years. Yeah. All these, I had hundreds of pages. And around, I think it was around 2015, 2009. Anyway, about around 15 years ago, they finally published Carl Jung's Red Book. By the way, how are we doing? I feel like I'm talking too much.
No, you were good.
No, you were totally fine.
Yeah, this is great.
Have you ever read Carl Jung's Red Book? Have you heard about it?
No.
Mm-mm.
Okay.
No.
Yeah, it's a very rare thing. But so Carl Jung, being a premier psychologist who spent his life trying to decipher and uncover the unconscious and its impact on us. And it turns out that in his critical stage, where he had a huge transformation in his thinking, where he broke off from Freud, he had started to do what he called active imagination, which is a lot like what I was talking about before, which is trying to shut off the ego and let the subconscious speak through you. In a way, you could say it's almost like ghostwriting. I mean, Victor Hugo did that. I mean, I'm sure there's many other forms. I'm not trying to say this is the way, but this was one example. And the Red Book was his way of literally, he was dealing with his, he was having an interaction with his subconscious on a confrontational level in order to come to terms with his rational self and his subconscious self. It's a magnificent piece of it's amazing. I mean, and it's rather unique. I mean, in a way, it feels like St. John, the Baptist, or Thomas Aquinas. I mean, it has these. It's a very mystical, esoteric work. Now, he purposely didn't publish it because he knew that if he published that, they would think he was crazy, and they would not accept his rational explanation of psychology. So he kept it under wraps. Now, fortunately, the Carl Jung estate let them publish it just 15 years ago. And this is, around World War I is when he started writing it. So it's quite an old document. But when I read his book, I started to realize that, wait a minute, this was not a, unique, almost crazy Kurt experience. This is actually, other people can have this. Therefore, there's some universality to it. And that gave me the courage to publish it, because before that, I would not have dared publish it. It's pretty weird. I mean, let's be honest. Who publishes a lyrical drama about mythological characters in the Battle of Subconscious in 2023? I mean, it's not exactly
not common.
New York Times.
No.
So, and then a great thing happened, which was COVID. To be honest with you, not because of the experience, but
Right.
because the lockdown gave me a year or two. Really, I just locked myself in this room in my sanctuary. I had my papers and walls, on the walls everywhere, and I started to piece together what happened to me then and all those remnants of lines, and then I published it. It was a long story and maybe complicated. Sorry.
Did you find that after that long of a time, you had lost touch with some of those thoughts and feelings and words that you wrote then? Did they seem familiar to you at all, or were you able to reconnect with them easily?
Yeah, I mean, so on the one hand, they were incredibly fresh and all there, but on the other hand, like I said, I didn't understand them all, and I still don't understand them all, to be honest with you. And by the way, I've had some amazing reviews from some people who have said, they don't understand this book, but they love it, and I feel like that's the greatest compliment I could get, to be honest with you, because I'm still trying to decipher Goethe and William Blake myself, so I appreciate that, but. Also, during that year, I was reading 3 to 5 books a week, buying all kinds of new books, and I had the greatest time. I love doing that. And you'll notice there's a very large appendix at the back of the book, which is me trying to, decipher what this happened and put it into context and give it some meaning outside of, let's say, my own misinterpretation. So, yeah, it was writing it was a whole other, putting the final thing together in 2000 last year was the year before was yeah, it was an amazing feat, besides the design aspect, which I enjoyed.
Sure.
I do have to ask, with a lot of your influences, you've mentioned a couple of authors and poets previously, but in reading 3 to 5 books a week, who are some of the authors that you think influenced you from the books that you were reading?
Influenced me for the final version, or influenced me back then?
Why not both?
Okay, yeah. Well, I mean, as I mentioned before, Neil Gaiman's Sandman series was a revelation to me, because and I said this to him once. I was at one of those lines. Actually, it was at one of the fairy festivals here in Europe, and I went up to him and I said, Neil, I just want to say thank you for making mythology relevant to me. And he looked at me aghast, like, how could he be making mythology relevant? I mean, it's always existed, but I, of course, didn't have time to explain it to him. But the truth is, the Sandman series made mythology personal and relevant. In other words, it's not just stories of abstract fictional figures. Those stories can be you, and you can be in those stories. You can be Zeus or Jupiter or Hermes or Endymion or everything. And that was huge. But of course, I read everything by Percy Shelley and Novalis, who's a German romantic, which is astounding. Friedrich von Hardenberg, Goethe, John Keats, William Blake, Thomas Traherne. If you ask me this question, I could probably go on for a couple of days, because I have a million influences. But if you talk about the last publication, or my ability to put together the publication, I would say it's Carl Jung. I had really only read his biography way back then, and Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell, the Hero with 1,000 Faces, those two really helped me make a coherent understanding of things. Yeah, so that's what I would say.
I can see that. From what you said about like the psychological journey, it's interesting, even from just how much mythology tries to, or what mythology does for life to explain certain like processes or things that have happened in the world. I think the same thing with fairy tales as with mythology is that it highlights different parts of the human experience. Or
Yes.
it tries, or it attempts to explain very complex natures of things in a very fantastical sorts of sense, because some of these human experiences feel somewhat otherworldly, or at least that's kind of
And
like
they
my
are,
perspective.
I mean, how do you rationally explain the subconscious, the unconscious? I mean, you can do it in a rational terms, right? Which Jung did. I mean, you can explain the process from a rational point of view, but that misses the essence. I mean, I heard a line the other day about, and I forgot what it was, but I mean, if you try to give an experience of seeing a picture by explaining the camera, you're missing the whole point, right? That's the mechanism is not the end point. It's not the experience. So I would wholeheartedly agree with you. I think fantasy and mythology are probably the only means by which that we can actually translate the subconscious, the spiritual, the soulful, the real, let's say, sense of life of the human experience. Because in irrational terms, then it becomes very Descartesian. And by the way, I give a lot of speeches, talks from a healthcare point of view and from a design point of view. And speaking about romanticism versus the rational, I mean, Descartes put forward this concept that I'm going on a tangent again. I apologize.
No, we love it.
Okay. So Rene Descartes, a brilliant, philosopher, but he put together this theory that basically described man as having mind and body, and the body is a biological mechanism, and he equated it with a clock. So if the clock is broken, you just fix the pendulum, which makes sense from a rational point of view. But the natural conclusion of that is then, animals are then basically, clocks and organisms, and man is separated from animals, which that's first how I got involved with being a anti-Descartesian, because I'm a fierce animal rights advocate. And by the way, I'm going on tangents, but in the Netherlands, we don't have a two-party system. There's about 50 political parties, and one of those is the Animal Party, which is so cool. I mean,
yeah.
Okay, but going back,
get on board with that.
But that Descartesian thought of to understand the universe, you have to break it down into parts, is still in practice today, and how we've evolved from academics have evolved, how we've evolved healthcare, how we've evolved urbanization, civilization. Maybe I'm being too esoteric here, but that is the antithesis of romanticism, because from a romantic point of view, we would see ourselves as mammals, or see ourselves as biological organisms, as part of our environment, as part of the world. I mean, we're independent from it. I mean, we have this microbiome with us, I mean, a circadian light impacts us. We are not independent from nature. And I forgot where I was going with this tangent, but yeah. You triggered me. I'm sorry.
That's all right.
That's totally fine.
We could probably have this conversation every single week for the rest of our lives, I feel.
We should. And we should.
We should.
Cool.
I think everybody should, with themselves and with the others around them.
Yeah.
Because I feel like there's so much to say and so much to educate even. I feel like there's...
Or just to inspire, because...
yes.
That's the other reason why I applaud you guys, because, you're promoting romanticism, and you are, frankly, unfortunately for you, unfortunately for the world, you're one of the few outlets that really is embracing romanticism from a modern point of view. I mean, there are lots of academic journals, and there's lots of academic approaches and studies on it, but from a, promoting romanticism as a ideology, sense of life, art form, you guys are rather unique. So I'm behind you 1,000%.
Thank you. That means a lot. I appreciate that. We, I don't know what to say.
When we started off putting the podcast together, for me at least, it was I don't know, I started the statement thinking I knew where that statement was going to go, and no.
That's okay.
Good. That means there's something there. I mean, that means there's really something powerful there. I mean, that's also the thing, I mean, if you're able to grasp something really quickly, I find that it lacks an energy or a value in your own transformation. Where am I trying to go with this? What I'm trying to say is that I think actually it's the struggle that is the alchemical process by which we grow. And if there is no struggle, I don't think we can actually grow, either mentally, spiritually, emotionally, romantically, socially. So I'm sorry, Troy, but I fully embrace your point of not having it there, because I think there's something there that I'd love to hear it when it comes out.
Could you tell that to all the people with whom I have like corporate meetings with? Because I do this consistently, and they all look at me like I have 3 heads, or like I'm a little on the loopy side. I'm just gonna take that clip and play it for them. Be like, no, there's something there. I just
Well, and you you guys are triggering me, so I love this. So it's great, but I've become a designer over the past 20 years, a creative director at Philips, which I didn't study for. I studied business and communications. I was in radio advertising before I moved to Europe, and what I found was that I actually, to be honest with you, I never knew that design as a competence existed like it does. Because I always thought design was, okay, well, then you actually have to draw, or you have to write, or you have to create a product, right? And I can't draw a straight line for the life of me. But design is a much larger construct. It's a much larger thing, which is basically, in essence, taking abstracts or taking a concept, deconstructing it, finding associations, reconstructing it, and reframing it into something new. And that, in its heart, is the play element. Without the play element, which is, we're all creative, and the play is a natural element of man. I mean, it's the thing. And I think that's also going back to what I said before, this idea of being able to play, which is being able to experiment, which is being able to test and to probe and to have curiosity. That's where the growth is. So if someone says to you in a meeting that, you're not making sense now, saying, well, that's because, you're not ready for the power of the creativity.
Ooh.
That's what you need to say, Trey.
Yes. I'm sorry, but you are not ready for the power of this creativity.
That's right.
You are not ready.
Wonderful.
Right?
Somebody please clip that.
I did.
And they did an interview with me once, and I came up with this analogy. I said, if you take a rubber duck, one of those yellow rubber ducks,
mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and you put it in the middle of a boardroom or a corporate room or a corporate meeting, and you put it there, and then you come back in, and everybody comes in. What's going to happen is it's going to spark creativity in the entire team, because our minds are triggered to constantly look at what it expects, and it's projecting what it expects. So, at every moment, our minds and our eyes and our brains are saying, oh, that's that, and that's that. I know that. And so it makes a construct. The moment where you put something peculiar in a construct that they don't expect, your mind has to say, oh, wait a minute, how do I make sense of this? And then they start to ask questions like, where did that duck come from? Why is that duck there? Who put that duck there? And then as soon as you get that you start to spur on these creative juices. So maybe that's another trick for you, which is bring a rubber duck, put it in the room before you get in there, and then let them handle it.
What's really funny is that I actually write or I design curriculum for the company that I work for. I think this is going to be one of our new warm-up exercises for in the morning. Like, just have a whole list of different morning activities that they can do, and just to get their brains kind of moving in the morning. Just put a rubber duck in front of the room. Just have a conversation about.
Take them out of the context. As soon as you take somebody out of context, we I have the coolest job in the world, because I get to support strategic partnerships with, Philips, and with healthcare organizations and governments and the Red Cross and all over the world. And what I find the best, let's say, way to do that is we purposely designed our design studio in such a way that you walk in and it doesn't feel corporate. There's an antique Persian rug on the floor that's all scrappy. It's like faded. We don't have normal desks and chairs. We use stools, and I mean, we design the environment to feel like you're going to somebody's living room. And so when you have corporate executives or politicians or government officials, and they come into this context, immediately they're uncomfortable because they don't, they're wearing their suits in this context. But it starts to open up this idea that, wait a minute, I'm in a different setting, which means I can approach this in a different way. And it's just one of those elements. If you control the experience, you control the outcome.
Like a grain of sand that can create a pearl.
Yes.
Nice.
Love that.
To see a grain of sand. William Blake.
Kurt, one thing that I do want to ask, because what I noticed about your book is that it is written in this poetic sort of fashion, and it reminded me a little bit of Shakespeare and how most of his plays were written in this kind of poetic fashion, and that he would use prose for very specific instances.
Yes.
And so from your standpoint, was there a reason why you were going more from like that poetic side versus like straight prose, or any other kind of like literary writing style?
Well, Troy, that's a fantastic question. And by the way, just having a conversation where you associate me with Shakespeare is just you won me over already. So thank you. I mean, that's
We're big
like
Shakespeare fans around here.
Oh God, yeah. Well, interesting. It's interesting to say that because I, even let's say Shelley in some of his lyrical dramas, and Keats, of course, and Endymion doing it in a different way, but and Shakespeare, I set my task. I set myself a challenge to make the entire piece a not perfect rhyme. It's actually in a what's her name's rhyme? The early Greek poet. What's her name? Only a few works. Well, I forgot her name, but anyway, I'll have to look up my Stephen Fry, the poet lesson. But so it's not in. I didn't intentionally try to rhyme it like you would think of in other things, and I certainly am capable of doing that because I've written a lot of them like that, and they feel now in retrospect artifice. But because I was dealing with, and because it was coming to me, these lines were not coming to me in a rational interaction way. I mean, they were, to be honest with you, they were all symbols and vague, surreal statements. They were they were puzzles, and so it would be, I thought, it would be a little odd to have all of some of those lines that were in puzzles and some of it in prose, and so I just decided to do it all. But that's a great question. I hope I achieved something there, because I also feel like there is a rhythmic music that goes along with the words, which also helps the interpretation and the experience. So it's not just poetry for the sake of poetry. In a way, I'm trying to simulate music as much as can. I mean, there's a great definition that poetry is basically the music of words, and so that's what I was trying to do. Speaking of music, by the way, I had a fantastic conversation with a guy who has been a artistic director in Vienna for many, many, many years, and when he read it, he said he heard it he heard it as music, with lines over music. And I thought, well, that's interesting you say that, because before I even wrote this book, I wrote this 12-minute symphonic piece on my synthesizer, which, when I look back now, was actually let's say a foreshadowing of what this experience would be, even though I didn't know it. So I sent him that piece, and I just sort of asked for his advice. Is this just horrible, or is there some merit here? And he said, no, it's very interesting. So I'm now working on a 12-piece symphony, 12 movements, with the thought that I would have actors on top reading the lines over each one of these, let's say, orchestrations that I would take from the original. And I'm hopefully going to be working with this local composer who's just incredibly genius, because I'm not a professional composer. So it could be that I write to you in a year, a couple of years, and there's potentially a premiere of Endymion, the tonal poem symphony in the Netherlands or in Vienna or something.
Well, and we'll have to book a flight at that point, right, Trey?
Okay.
Yes. The Modern Romantic goes Europe.
That would be so amazing.
Yeah. I mean, and I forgot to tell you that, when COVID came around, there was another trigger for me, which was that I felt like, I actually was very afraid of getting COVID. I was, very paranoid of it. I have a chronic nasal condition and other things, but so I thought, if I die from COVID and I haven't finished Endymion, that's the last thing I'm going to think of. So that was the other reason that I said, like, okay, I need to get this done. Now, of course, my other aspiration is to actually finalize all these musical concepts that I've been writing over the many years. And, I have millions of poems and musical concepts from back then, which I'm pulling on. So it's a way during that time, it was so creative between 22 and 27. The amount of creativity I had during then was quite rather overwhelming. So I have this vast, warehouse of stuff that I can pull from. That being said, I also feel like, it really took me to get to my mid-50s to have the maturity and the, let's say, all this learning of doing creative direction and design in order to produce the final book in a manner that I feel proud of, because it took a lot of editing. I mean, I literally had 5,000 lines I had to remove or edit, or it was a monster of a project of stuff, of culmination to put it together into the pieces that it was, because it didn't happen linearly back then. I mean, Act 1 wasn't first and Act 3. It was all over the place. I had to make sense out of it, which was, by the way, like I said, a thrilling, really thing to do as well. But just a side note.
And you said something about another book you're working on.
I'm working on two things. So the first is a book about how we need to think about and focus on redesigning ecosystems.
Okay.
And that's healthcare ecosystem, urban experience, agriculture. This idea that we're going to solve the problems of the world now by doing individual iterations or individual value propositions is not going to work. It's like there's a dam here and we're putting a Band-Aid, on many places on the dam. My feeling is we need to rethink the entire dam if we're going to survive this, to be honest with you. And that's something I've been learning over the past 10 to 12 years when I think about, city planning, when I think about healthcare, and agriculture. And so that's what that book's about. But my next poetic piece is also something from back then, which is called La Mort de Orphée, which is the death of Orpheus, the story of Orpheus and Eurydice. And
those are magic words around here too.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah,
yeah. See the smile on Trey's face.
So there, the first opera that was written was actually The Tale of Orpheus, and have since been very famous works about it. And there was even a play written a couple of years back by Sarah Ruhl called Eurydice, and we actually staged it up here in Charlotte, and I got to play Hades in that tale.
Super cool! Wow! Oh, that's fantastic.
It's great. I had such a fantastic time. Kind of along the same lines as your work, as your current work with Endymion, and is that the oh my gosh, I can't think of what her name is. I'm just going to call her the dramaturg. Called it a dramatic poem, in which that we were acting it out on the stage. Yes, there were lines, but it was to be delivered in more of a poetic sort of sense.
Wow.
and that's the way that the director conceived it, turned it into a very stylistic sort of approach to things. We moved in a particular fashion. Our hand gestures were always in a particular way.
Yeah.
So, tangent aside, yes, we love the Tale of Orpheus around here.
Wow. If I might, if you could tell me who the author is and if there's any way I could see it, read it, or anything, I would be fascinated to see it. That sounds fantastic.
Sarah Ruhl, last
Sarah
name
Ruhl.
last name is Ruhl.
Uh-huh.
She's the author. I believe that they're staging a production at some fairly high up production company here in the States. I don't
Yes.
remember which one, but it is a sublime piece of work, and I highly recommend that you
Awesome.
check it out.
Fantastic. I mean, yeah. I don't know if you can see it, but
Oh, look at
kind of
that.
showing up? I don't know if it's showing up.
Can you describe
Yeah.
that for our audience too?
Right. Good point. It's a large brass medallion, cast brass, with
It is large, yeah.
a very romanticized Orpheus with long hair, and of course the laurel, holding a lyre in a, I would call it a melancholic, tragic stance.
It's that's an amazing piece.
Yeah, it's a reproduction from a French artist, and I forgot what it was, but 18th century, and you can find it outside the Louvre. There's one of these stores. They also have it in medallions and other things, but the real one's there. But, yeah, I'm big on Orpheus. Orpheus was the first thing I was going to write, because it had to do with a cat. I had a 6-month-old cat, Orphe, who passed away, from FIP, and it was so impactful to me and so dramatic to me and so overwhelming to me that I wrote a symphonic piece, but I was also going to write a whole poem about him. So that's where it started. But that was again 35 years ago. But yeah. Side note.
It's amazing what an impact a 6-month-old cat will have on your life.
Totally.
I love that. I do have a question for Trey, though, because I kind of want to plug something for him. Trey, tell me, because I'm not real familiar, and I imagine our audience wouldn't be either, but tell me how the Tale of Orpheus and Eurydice on Orphetunes YouTube channel coincides with this story.
Okay. So the namesake of my YouTube channel is Orphetunes, based on the Orpheus myth. It had started out by a completely different name, and I'm not trying to call myself Orpheus. I just wanted a way to convey that we both tell stories, and much to your point about how text can be the music of words. So very much along that same line. So whether I'm telling a story or whether I'm like singing a song or something of that nature, it is going to be something about storytelling. And my first ever YouTube storytelling was the Tale of Orpheus and Eurydice.
And
it
it's
is narrated.
fabulous. It's
Wow,
so good.
I'm gonna watch that.
Oh,
Are you
thank
familiar with the Orphic mythology?
To a decent extent. I don't know like how much my knowledge goes, so to a decent extent, yes.
There's a lot of it, but of course the Orphics became a pseudo religion, which was based around what was supposed to be Orpheus's teachings, and one of those is that the second race of man after Jupiter or Zeus, depending on which mythology it had, destroyed the first ones who were very evil. Prometheus developed and made the second generation of man. And not only did him teach him in agriculture, but he taught them in the arts. And he also instilled on them to create a society which was based around non-sacrifice and art. So when you think about the Orphic, let's say, mythology of the history of man, in a way, it's the perfect state of man is that we are artists and we are living as one with nature. Cool, huh?
That
Very
is
cool.
really cool.
Yeah.
Okay, well, now I'm in my head.
Simmer on
Good.
that. Right.
I'm just going to simmer on that for a little bit.
Well, you can find Orphetunes easily enough on YouTube by doing a search for Orphetunes, Orphytunes. I also put the
Yep.
link in the chat for anybody who would like it.
Awesome. That's so
So-
coincidental. Fantastic.
That's my favorite thing you've done, Trey. I just want you to know.
Did you, by the way, did you happen to read the Sandman special with the Orpheus? Did you see that?
No, I haven't.
Okay, you should check that out. There's one. He did one special edition, a annual, which was all based around the Orpheus myth. And I don't know if you like Neil Gaiman or not, but that one issue was a particularly influential on me. So
Okay, you don't know if I like Neil Gaiman.
okay, all right. I wasn't sure.
I think my first Neil Gaiman novel was American Gods.
Oh right.
And then after that, it was the Sandman series, and then it was, oh my God, what else do I have on my Good and Evil.
Good Omens.
Oh my God, why did I?
No,
Yep.
it's good. That was. I mean, it could just as well be Good as Evil as well, because that's what it's about. But
Good Omens. Good grief. Well,
Omens.
nope. Hashtag fake fan.
but check out the and if you can find it, there's one which has a glow in the dark cover, which is super cool.
Oh,
So if you get the original comic, which you can find probably on eBay, but the original thing is this glow in the dark. Anyway,
cool.
So awesome.
I'd note on Orpheus.
Okay. Well, Seth, if you hear that, I now have a birthday present for you for me. So there you go. That is so interesting. I could sit here and talk about Orpheus and
Yeah.
for a while now.
But I have a question for you guys.
Yeah.
You know, you've done a number of these, and you've interviewed a number of people, and do you find any, let's say, consistent patterns in foreshadowing where we're going in as a romantic movement? I mean, you know, where do you see romanticism going? And just as a side note, because I'm not trying to load the, I'm not trying.
That's
I
all
mean, I shouldn't try to say I'm loading the answer, but in my mind, actually, right now, I actually feel like comics are probably the last vestige of the ability for romanticism to show out. And now, of course, there are movies which are good, but if I look at it from a point of view influencing of a culture, I actually find that it's probably not poetry books, but it's probably deeper inside, comics. But that's just my point of view. But I'd love to hear where you guys are seeing it based on your experience with all these people.
I think it is a gigantic movement happening that is going under different names. For instance, cottagecore. Like people don't know to call it romanticism. So we're calling it cottagecore because we have to reinvent. You know, it used to be a bell bottom, then it became a flare leg, but we can't call it a bell bottom anymore. You know, so I think that's kind of what's happening is we even have, we did a whole episode once that we never published that was Dark Academia.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, Dark Academia, of course.
And that we delved into that for an evening, and we talked about how that is becoming that reared its head in the mainstream to some degree, and we've seen that in some even recent television shows. And I mean, I loved Dead Poets Society for that reason,
Of course.
and
Of course.
how we would
And Wednesday Addams.
Yes, that was my next reference. Was the Wednesday show. I really feel like that is an element of romanticism under a different name.
Sure.
And
I agree.
sorry, Trey, were you gonna? I didn't want to.
Oh, and kind of to echo that same sentiment, what we called romanticism had so many like subgenres within it, but I think at the time that the romanticism movement was happening back in the 1800s, there was not I think, as many people as there are today. And so some of these, what we would consider niche interests of the time, are now much broader to include cottagecore, to include more of the Gothic side of things. And they overlap so much that they still all fall within Romanticism, but now they have a space to exist within their own thing, but within a larger circle of Romanticism. So much like Charlotte's City Limits, I think it's only just going to keep growing and growing and growing and growing.
Much like Charlotte's.
That's super cool because you're right. I mean, I looked it up, and basically, Shelley, when he produced some of his volumes, it was around 250 copies that he actually, the printer actually, the publisher actually produced. Now Byron, of course, had, a 10,000 run, but Byron is in a different league, and same thing with Keats. So I would agree with you. And William Blake, of course, he never really found a success, and neither, outside of the engravings and other things. So I think there you make a fair point. And of course, they were all ostracized, and society was completely against them. At least we don't have that oppression of society now. What we do have is a society that probably doesn't is a bit too egocentric to embrace it. But that's something that art can change. I was looking through some of the chats, and I saw somebody had mentioned that their father had said something to them.
Yes, that's
so cool. Now I can't find it.
I was going to go back as well. That's Archer 33X in the chat. He said, "My father used to say this frequently: there is no growth without struggle."
Oh wow, great! Wow, thank you for bringing that up. That's super cool. Your father is a cool guy. Is there anything else that we missed from the chat that we want to talk about?
Let's see. I was going to bring it up, but we were going on a roll there. So
on tangents.
We talked about bringing. Let's see, Neil Gaiman. What hit home with a lot of people? It looks like. And then Archer 33X, you should know, is Josh, our moderator.
Oh, okay.
So he
Josh
said, "Yeah,
brilliant.
Here, if you want to pop on, Josh, we can bring you on." He said the English major in me is bowing down. I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy. And yeah, his father. I should just let him tell. Josh, do you mind coming? There's a delay, so he may not hear this immediately. Yeah, he says sure. Okay, there he is.
All right.
I didn't want to just tell the story of your father. You should tell it yourself.
I appreciate that. Well, we were talking about struggle and and life and how growth doesn't happen unless we're either pushing ourselves or being pushed by some
tragedy.
Yeah, right. Something.
Or love. Or...
yeah, and my dad, he was an author, he's an English professor. He said it all the time. Life is struggle. If you're not struggling, you're not living. And if you're not struggling, you're not living. You're not growing. Wow. And we heard it all the time as kids, and when we were 10, 12, 14, we're like, yeah, whatever, Dad. Yeah, as kids do. Now that of course we're adults and I'm older and I have kids of my own. Now I get it. Now I'm seeing these things and I understand those lessons a lot more clearly and a lot more broadly than, of course, Dad just being Dad. So when you were talking about that really struck a chord for me.
That's super awesome. Thank you. Brilliant.
Thank you.
Super cool. And speaking of my dad, and my early influences, back to you, Troy. I mean, when I was very, very young, my father used to recite. I have a brother and a sister, and our favorite thing was after dinner, he would recite Poe's Raven to us. And he would do the voice. He would do Nevermore, and it was just super thrilling. So he's probably the one responsible for me becoming a romantic, despite the fact that. Until the day he died, he was constantly asking me to get my hair cut because he never liked my long hair.
I ran into that too. I don't have any hair anymore, but I used to have really long hair as well. I heard it all the time, again, from Mom and Dad.
Oh, yeah? Yeah, right.
When are you cutting your hair? I don't want to.
Yeah. No.
Right? It's interesting because it's something that we've seen as a thread with our previous guests as well. James Navy, who hiked the Appalachian Trail, talked about discomfort. If you don't put yourself in places of discomfort, that then you're not giving yourself the opportunity to grow. And also Heather Cook, who was on, talked about how fear is an opportunity for growth.
Yeah.
And that's how she sees fear, which I thought was such a cool take on fear, because that's not something I believe most people even think about with fear. They're just afraid. Yeah. So I thought that was, that's all a really cool way to look at growth and about what life really is and has the potential to be.
Agreed. Cool.
Sorry, Josh, if you were done. He like took himself out, so I think we're okay. I think we're fine.
We're all good.
I'm sorry, Trey. We can never tell when we're about to say something, and we don't want to talk over the top of each other. So I try to watch for visual clues.
You need to find a tell.
I do. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Carol Burnett. Yeah.
Yes.
Right. I do wonder, like, we look back to these authors like Byron and Shelley and those names, and we look back at those, and those are like for a lot of us, that's a benchmark. And I do wonder about the future of Romanticism in who we're going to look back at 100 years from now. Who are the Romanticists of today? Who are the Romantics today, rather? Well, I can speak. That's nice.
That's great.
Who are the Romantics today that in 100 years our ancestors, or not our ancestors, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
the people after us will look back and see, like, I would love to be one that would make some sort of impact, but, I'm not necessarily an author, but will they look back at Kurt Ward and read?
Will they?
Right.
Let's not
and
use
say,
me as the example.
this was one of our great romantics.
I love what you're saying, because to be honest with you, I know a handful of people who have actually read Shelley and Keats, here and there, but, really read and delved into it. And, I can understand, and Shakespeare, of course, unless you're obsessed with it, the language is incredibly difficult. And what's startling, which I thought was startling, was the rise of social media and the, let's say, illiteracy that was happening. But funny enough, within a particular audience, especially in social media, there's an incredible rise in reading the Romantics and reading, great novels. So that gives me great hope. I've also seen a rise in esotericism recently, which I also find incredibly encouraging, because I think, to be honest, I'm getting on my bench again.
That's okay.
What am I, my preacher's stool? What am I talking about? No, but you can't change the world unless you can change yourself. And if you don't know yourself, you can't change the world. And I think one of the problems with humanity is the reason why there is evil or oppression is because they haven't taken the time to truly understand themselves and understand their nature in relation to the universe. So I find the rise in esoteric thinking, from whatever angle, incredibly encouraging, because what it means is that people are starting to try to understand who they are and what they believe in. I mean, I don't just mean Wiccan. That's great. I'm fantastic. Wiccan, blessed be. Pagan or Gnostics or Christians. Whatever it is that is going to help you understand yourself in relation to the universe is fantastic. I just find that, unfortunately, I think in our schools, and that happened when I was growing up as well, in our schools and in our educational processes and in our academics and in our cities and our societies, this whole side of experiencing life and getting to understand yourself is being suppressed, especially with, if you start to say, I'm starting to question my relation to the universe, what are they going to do? They're going to put you on opioids. But that's natural. Our natural state is to try and understand ourselves in relation to the universe. That's what it means to be human. I'm preaching again. Sorry.
No, in fact, Josh in the chat said, "Preach on, brother Kurt."
Oh yeah.
I from recently, like growing up at the very inception of social media for me, there, don't get me wrong, I like social media for what it is, and I think that it helps in a variety of ways. But for many times, I look at it like it's a distraction for so many different types of things. And when I look at how we use it today and what is its intention, I think that it's kind of interfering with some of that. But over probably the last like 2 years, thanks to COVID, especially with TikTok, that has been the place that I've looked at where I see the most amount of conversations with people, engaging in a dialogue that is not just baselets. It's not, oh my God, dude, like my hair up like this or down like this. It's becoming a much more fluid sort of conversation of, I'm engaging in this kind of problem and I want to talk it out with other people who want to actively engage with me on this specific issue.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts? And it's not just an attack, it is an engagement of asking a question and asking for genuine feedback on the matter. And that's what I love about TikTok, is that once you find your community, you have got your community.
I mean, I'm totally aware of the let's say the bullying aspect of it, but I experienced bullying in real life when I was growing up as well. But I don't know how I would have turned out if, at the age of 14, I had found, other people who were obsessed with, Shelley or Keats or whatever I was into. Because, you just, back then you don't, you were just, you were in isolation, in Midwest America, at least for me. Some people might be more luckier and have been able to found peers with the same interest. But, I had one friend, and we had one area that we explored in, but that was it. So I'm with you. I think there is a huge possibility for people to find their sub communities in there, and as long as that overweight of the other thing that doesn't get in their way, I think it could be good.
Absolutely. Well, Kurt, I have to say that this has been a truly incredible time having you on our podcast today. I really have enjoyed myself, and I was not expecting like the conversations to go in the directions that we did, but I'm so thankful they did. I have a lot to think on, is what I'm trying to say.
Me too. Super cool. No, it's a pleasure. Again, I can always talk about romanticism, life and meaning and art and existentialism, and it's what matters to me. I mean, as you can see, I'm a little obsessed about it.
But I love it.
No, I was surprised you didn't ask me about my busts. I
was going to, but I was going to wait till off the air because anybody who's just listening can't see what we're looking at. So
blessed. Yeah, but I can let me at least explain that I have reproductions, by the way.
Yeah, go for it.
None of them are really antique, but I have John Keats' death mask. I have William Blake's death mask. I have a very hard to find modern reproduction of a Novalis bust, Friedrich von Hardenberg, a Schiller bust, and I also have, of course, 2 reproductions of oval miniatures of Mary and Percy Shelley, which are, like say they're not the originals, but they are hand painted, and I can't do without them. Not to mention my library with the complete works of Shelley and Blake and Keats and Novalis. So I finally created my inner sanctum together with my William Morris wallpaper of Carla.
I love William Morris. I bought a bunch of William Morris fabric because I wanted to create my own clothing out of it.
Oh, super cool.
Because I thought, how cool would it be to have like a shirt or something out of that like normally it would be on a pillow maybe or a
absolutely.
wallpaper, but I wanted to wear it.
Yeah, and you know, they did make fabrics, right? I mean, the
yeah.
Morrison Company, of course, don't exist. And Harry Clark, I don't know if you know Harry Clark, the illustrator.
Vaguely.
Yeah, but if you look up Harry Clark, you know, 19th century Irish, there's a lot of Faust. When you look up Faust illustration, he usually comes up with that. He's like Edmund Dulac, but I don't know why I'm telling you this, but you know, he actually created fabrics, which I thought that would be super cool.
Yeah.
And Takato Yamamoto, also, who's a contemporary Japanese artist, a lot like, you know, Vampire Hunter D. I don't know if you know them, but
yeah.
Anyway, if you look up Takato Yamamoto and a dress, I mean, they've made dresses out of his patterns, which are just super exquisite. If I was a girl, I'd be wearing those.
That's super right up my. I'm going to look. Also, I'm a girl.
Yeah. No, it's been a pleasure. Thank you guys very much. And if something happens with the symphony or my next book, I will definitely reach out to you. And thank you to everybody who's been in the chats who have been very encouraging. That's incredibly kind, and I'm grateful. If anybody happens to have any comments, thoughts, criticisms about my work or anything, I'm happy to hear it. I'm okay with it. Doesn't all have to be positive.
You've heard mine. That is
okay.
That is all I have. You've heard all of it. It's wonderful, and I would love to have you back on sometime. I feel like this has just been a small piece of the conversation, and we'd love to have more.
I would too. Fantastic. Okay.
Excellent.
Absolutely. Well, as we close out the episode here today, again, major shout out to Kurt. You can check out Mr. Kurt here at his website, www.kurtrward.com, KURTRWARD.com. You can also find him at Goodreads by searching for his name, Kurt R. Ward at Goodreads. As we close out here, I want to thank everyone for being on today. Thank you so much to our moderators. This episode, along with probably every other episode, is going to be dedicated in memory to and made possible because of Joe Capone, our moderator, fellow comedian, critic, encourager, and great friend. Follow us wherever you tune into podcasts. For updates, announcements, and more, please follow us on social media under Modern Romantic, and please help us reach our subscriber goals. Thank you to everyone, and I want you to have an esoteric day.
Indeed.
That's right. Go
Must
read
be.
a book. And go get Kurt's book, because it is phenomenal, and everybody should have a copy. And I don't like just blindly plugging books. So this was amazing. I actually am holding this in my hand right now. So it's real, and I'm encouraging you to get it because you should have it for real. Don't just say that. We don't have authors on that we don't actually want to support. So thank you, everybody.
Everybody, have a great day. We love you.